Hello, you are watching Shalom World News. I'm David Kerr from Lansing in Michigan, and these are your latest news headlines from around the world. The Secretary-General of the United Nations is pleading with warring parties in Sudan to uphold a ceasefire for at least 3 days to allow civilians stranded in combat areas to access food, medicine and other necessities. Following a virtual meeting on the problem called by the African Union, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for the violence to be put away for the duration of the Eid al-Fitr celebrations, which mark the end of the Islamic month of fasting known as Ramadan. At least 350 people have been killed since clashes broke out in recent weeks between the military and the paramilitary force known as the Rapid Support Forces. Mr. Guterres told reporters at the UN headquarters in New York that the temporary ceasefire must be the first step in paving the way for a permanent ceasefire. Meanwhile, the United States says it is planning to deploy more military personnel to the nearby country of Djibouti in anticipation of a potential mission to evacuate staff members of the US Embassy in the Sudanese capital of Khartoum. The Republican governor of Mississippi is hailing a raft of new laws as being part of a new pro-life agenda within the US state. This week saw Governor Tate Reeves give final approval to a total of 8 new pro-life and pro-family laws. Among the 8 bills signed were measures aimed at improving adoption and foster services. There are also measures to create and enhance support networks for new mothers and their children and to give tax breaks for adoptive and foster parents. A plan by legislators in Washington state to end legal protections for the seal of confession is facing continued criticism from the church. Bishop Thomas Daly of Spokane says his priests would not break the seal of confession even if they risked facing going to jail. Bishop Daly made his comments in a letter to the clergy and lay faithful of his diocese, stating, "The sacrament of penance is sacred and will remain that way in the Diocese of Spokane." At present, lawmakers in Washington are debating measures seeking to punish any priest who doesn't report claims of abuse heard during the sacrament of confession. Pope Francis says that environmental and social crises are not separate but one. The Holy Father made his comments during a meeting in Rome on Thursday with interfaith leaders from Greater Manchester in England. He expressed his gratitude for their efforts as leaders in both religion and politics to spread awareness of the need to safeguard the environment. The Pope said that the current commitment to preserving God's gift of creation must be part of a larger initiative to advance what he called an integral ecology that recognises the tragic impacts of environmental degradation on the lives of the underprivileged. The US House of Representatives has passed legislation to prohibit biological males from competing in girls' and women's sports at school. The Protection of Women and Girls in Sport Act was approved by a vote of 219 to 203, with all Republican members voting yes and all Democrat members voting no. Republican lawmakers argued that this legislation is necessary to protect women and girls from competing against males who claim to be female, which they argue can endanger the safety of female athletes, while also creating unfairness in school sporting competitions. Meanwhile, similar legislation is currently being progressed at a state level in North Carolina and Alabama and has already been passed in recent days in both Missouri and South Dakota. US bishops have criticised a vote in the United States Senate to add abortion to health benefits provided to military veterans and their families, calling it a gross failure. The comments were issued in a joint statement from the president of the US Bishops' Conference, Archbishop Timothy Broglio, and Bishop Michael Burbidge, who is the chair of the Bishops' Committee on Pro-Life Activities. The bishops deemed it inhumane to use taxpayers' money for abortion as, quote, a so-called solution to pregnancy, rather than resources needed to welcome a child and flourish in a family. The president of Uganda has asked for amendments to be made to a controversial new bill against the promotion and practice of homosexuality before he signs it into law. President Yoweri Museveni's decision was announced late on Thursday after a meeting with lawmakers from his ruling party. A spokesman for President Museveni said he is not opposed to the punishments proposed in the bill, but wants lawmakers also to look into, quote, the issue of rehabilitation. President Museveni told lawmakers that he refuses to be swayed by threats from Western governments and companies over the bill, saying it is good that you rejected pressure from the imperialists and adding that Europe is lost, so they also want us to be lost. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has repeated his criticism of gender theory being taught in public schools. Governor DeSantis was speaking at an event in Charleston, South Carolina, organised by a group called Moms for Liberty. Among other things, Governor DeSantis told those gathered of his opposition to the idea that teachers permitting students to choose their own personal pronouns in contradiction to their biological sex. Governor DeSantis is widely viewed as being amongst the frontrunners to become the next Republican candidate for the US presidency. Meanwhile, the Republican governor of Arkansas has signed a bill into law aimed at protecting the religious convictions and identity of faith-based organisations from discriminatory actions. Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders signed House Bill 1615, which is also known as the Conscience Protection Act, into law on Wednesday. It bans the state government from taking, quote, any discriminatory action against a religious organisation on the basis of the religious identity or status of that religious organisation. To South America, and the Colombian House of Representatives has advanced a new bill aimed at protecting parental rights when it comes to sex education in schools. The Parents Choose Bill was approved on Wednesday. It aims to protect the right of parents to teach their children in ways consistent with their beliefs in both public and private educational institutions. The draft legislation states that sex education is necessary, but is also something that parents and not the state are responsible for. The bill will now continue its way through the legislative process. The legal advocacy group, the Alliance for Defending Freedom, has issued a letter to the White House seeking US intervention to alleviate discrimination faced by Christians and other religious minorities in Vietnam. The ADF letter is signed by more than 70 international religious organisations and academics. The joint letter details the persecution of Christians and other religious minorities. It was delivered to the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and other authorities earlier this week. Finally, a delegation from the US-based Catholic charity, the Papal Foundation, are currently in Rome for their annual pilgrimage and a meeting with Pope Francis. The charity has been supporting Catholic initiatives around the globe for the past 35 years. The delegation arrived in Rome on April the 18th and will be in the city until the 22nd. The Papal Foundation is the only charitable organisation in the United States that is exclusively dedicated to fulfilling the requests of the Pope for the needs of the Church. Since its inception in 1988, the Papal Foundation and its stewards of St. Peter have allocated more than $200 million in grants and scholarships around the world to more than 2,000 projects selected by Pope Francis, Pope Benedict and Pope St. John Paul II. Well, that's your latest headlines for now. Do join us for more tomorrow. You can also get news updates at swnews.org. Shalom.